Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our author appearance tonight. We're going to start on time.
That's what they said.
We're going to be filmed tonight by TCTV, so if you would like to recommend this program to any of your friends, tell them they could check the schedule to see when this is televised, or they can watch it on demand at any time through the website, the Trumbull Community Television website. So, Catherine, I will leave the program to you.
Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is going to upset everybody terribly, but I'd like you to all come and sit sort of centrally here. Can you, those of you in the back row especially, just come close. I definitely do not bite. I sometimes make people do exercises, but I do not bite. So just come on in close, and we'll have a nice little chat, and that'll be a much cozier thing. Usually, I do these as a conversation more than a lecture, so that's good. All right, good. If that's as close as I can get you, then I'll just have to take it. Anyway, I'm Catherine Jacobson Raymond, and I thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It was a real surprise. I was at RJ Julia when the book first came out last spring. We had a good crowd there, and I said, lovely part of Connecticut. This is so beautiful here. I probably never be back since I live in California, and darn, here I am again, back in this part of Connecticut, and it is really very nice. I brought both of my books with me tonight because I often find people ask me questions about the second book, and here come some more guests, so come on in and come up front as much as you can. This is the book that came out in May, Crooked. That's probably why you're all here. This is the book about the back pain industry. This is my first book called Carved in Sand, and it is about memory and attention and what happens to it in middle age. When I say that, people always say, nothing good. And actually, that's not really true, and there's much to be learned here. In fact, chronic pain of all types, and memory issues are in some ways related to each other, which is something I had no idea of when I decided to do this book, but I found more and more parallels and crossovers as I proceeded. So let me ask you, who in this audience is currently suffering from back pain? Almost everyone? Just about. Is there anyone here who isn't, shall we say? Okay. So let me ask you, sir, what brought you here?
It's an interesting topic. I have occasional back pain, but for the most part,
You just were very interested in the topic. Well, good, because I really like to have people here, people come who are not currently suffering from back pain, because it gives them a little bit more perspective about what it's all about. And for those who are, I hope you'll leave here with some very clear ideas of solutions. Come on in. See, I told you that people they come a little late, even when we start on time. Come on in and come up front if you can. Sort of second, third row is good. Okay. So let me ask you another question. How many here have had epidural steroid injections? Almost everyone again. How many have had any type of spine surgery? One.
surgery.
Spine surgery. One. Two. How many here have been either offered a painkiller prescription or actually taken the painkillers? You don't have to say, but how many have been at least offered opioids such as Vicodin or, hydrocodone of various types? So could I see those hands again? That was very shy. Okay, so that's a large percentage of those here. And how many have seen a community surgeon in this area? Someone who's local, say not at Yale New Haven, but a local spine surgeon? A few. How many have gone out of the area to see a spine surgeon? Out of the area means not local, not in this town or say one or two towns over. So people, you've pursued this past. All right, well, this is what happened to me. I had developed back pain when I was 16, and I had come flying off a horse at high speed right onto my hip, and things were really never the same after that. I had been working that summer, and I was too embarrassed to tell the camp that I was working for that this had happened, so I just dragged my right leg around for the next 3 weeks trying to accomplish my chores, and it was never treated. And you know, I went through those teenage years and through my 20s. Once in a while I'd be in a yoga class and things would lock up so badly that the yoga teacher would have to, she couldn't leave. You know, I'd be on the floor and she simply could not leave until I could unlock my body sufficiently to crawl out of there. But truly it was intermittent and I didn't think very much of it. And then when my children were born, things got worse. And then as I became their personal Sherpa, and as mothers, we know what that's like, it was getting much harder. But it wasn't until I wrote this book and started to travel all over the country and ultimately around the world to give lectures on this topic that I was in so much pain that I could barely stand at the podium, and I would literally be shaking. And people probably assumed I was nervous. I have never been nervous at a podium in my life, but the pain was excruciating, and I had to think about what was going to happen next. The critical moment came in the suburbs of Philadelphia when I was dropped back at a train station after a lecture, and I had a suitcase in one hand and a briefcase in another, and I were mostly old enough to remember trains where you had to step up onto the train steps. The platform was not level with the doors, and I went to step up, and I knew I couldn't make it. I had to step back down and stand on the platform and watch the train go by at about 9 o'clock at night in the Philadelphia suburbs. And at that point, I said to myself, this has got to change. It just has to. And I did what we all do. I called my primary care doctor, and I said, I got to see you. I went to see him. I said, he offered me more physical therapy. I'd already been through 3 sessions of physical therapy of, 4 times each. I said, that's not going to help. He said, I can get you some painkillers to get you over the hump. And I said, the hump? The hump has been since I was 16 years old. This is not a hump. And he said, okay, I will send you next door. And I live in a fairly small town in Northern California. I will send you next door to the spine surgeon. I'll get an MRI. We'll see what happens. And in many ways, that was when this book got started. Because when I got that MRI and the spine surgeon read it and told me that I had, quote unquote, degenerative disc disease. Who's heard that term? Anybody here have wrinkles? Yes. Degenerative disc disease is wrinkles on the inside, effectively. But I didn't know that. Of course I didn't know it. And I went home that night and made dinner, sat my husband down on the sofa and said, so this is the thing. I have something called degenerative disc disease, and I'm sure that it's going to get worse. I have an appointment to speak with a surgeon next week, but this is not going away, and it's serious. And he was really worried. I think he thought this could affect dinner on the table and the laundry and the beds being made and all of that stuff. And he was right. It was definitely going to affect it, but not in the way he thought. So eventually, I saw that surgeon, and he gave me, and I got a list of options. It was literally a laundry list. I still have it. It was written, interestingly enough, on a prescription pad for OxyContin. Now, there's an irony in that, but he wrote, there were 5 items. I could have epidural steroid injections. I could go to more physical therapy. I could go ahead with the painkillers. I could proceed with surgery of 2 different types. And he handed this to me, and I said, what am I supposed to do with this? Who can make a decision based on this? And he said, well, I want you to go home and research these on the internet. And I thought, there is something horribly, seriously wrong here. If the solution here, that I'm being given, is that I should go home and research it. And I said, you know, you're the surgeon. You have years and years and years of experience. He goes, this is called shared decision making. This is not what is called shared decision making. Shared decision making is when a very, very experienced physician helps you understand your options. It is not when you are given a laundry list. And what I realized was that this laundry list, every single option on it was just as good as another option, because none of them have good evidence, not one. And it took months for me, many, many months really, for me to gain a deep understanding of how far wrong this business, and it is a business, it is an industry, had gone. But that's what Crooked is about. And my findings, as I think you all know, I'm an investigative reporter. I've been at it for 4 decades. I started immediately out the day I graduated from college. I actually was already working before I graduated, so before then. And I'm not a healthcare provider, any kind of therapist, so the only thing that I do is deal with interviews of experts, of patients, and very, very specifically the medical literature, which is not what you see on the internet. It's when you Google degenerative disc disease, what you get really is a bunch of marketing from various organizations. Some of them may look impartial. Believe me, they are not. They are all, quote unquote, the grassroots ones. They are all funded by drug companies or device manufacturers. They all drive you in one direction and one direction only. And I started to read the medical literature, which is published on PubMed, which you can go there. It will be hard to understand what you're reading, but you definitely can. It's open to all. And I started to read the papers of people who had really seriously looked into outcomes. And what I saw was very alarming. I saw that there were lots of problems with physical therapy. It was often administered in an insurance-paid environment where there's one physical therapist and a great many aides. And after being seen briefly by the physical therapist, you would be turned over to the aides, who would then proceed to potentially get on their cell phones while you did the stick figure exercises that they had given you a sheet for. They gave that same sheet to everyone who came in that week. And then there was the application of ice and electrostim therapy, where they put the electrodes on your back. So you had your heat, your cold, your stimulation, and then you were good to go, except you weren't. And after 3-4 sessions, if you hadn't already quit, you probably were not doing your exercises. You were not getting better. And guess what? At that point, your surgeon could say, failed physical therapy is now a candidate for surgery. So there was a fair amount of collusion between physical therapists operating in that insurance-paid environment and surgeons. Now, there's an entirely different group of physical therapists, independent physical therapists who specialize in orthopedic problems, who don't take insurance, they do cost money, and they don't use heat and cold and electrostim, and they do put you through rigorous exercise, rehab-focused exercise, and they also often do a lot of hands-on manipulation. Those folks were having pretty good successes because they were exercise-focused. Now, we'll get to more on that topic soon, but I want to talk about chiropractic. Well, I'd been to a bunch of chiropractors. Who here has been to at least one? Okay, about everybody. And somehow the outcomes there are not too great generally. Now, there are people who swear by their chiropractors. I'm sure you've met them. Some of you may swear by yours, but I always wonder about this swearing thing. I mean, you do not swear by your OBGYN. No one does. Somehow, to swear by a chiropractor implies an act of faith. And seemingly that is what it takes, because a traditional chiropractor who does adjustments of subluxations, do those terms ring a bell here? There is absolutely no evidence of benefit for that past 1 to 2 sessions in the acute, meaning of recent onset phase of back pain. But that's not how chiropractors work, is it? No, you go in, they say, oh, we got to x-ray you. Okay, we do this series of x-rays now. Hold this bottle here for energetic assessment, and hold one here, and now we'll do this with your hands. And okay, I think you need about 20 sessions, maybe 3 times a week for 3 months, and then after that you could drop back down to 2 times a week, and it'd be good if you come for a year, and if you don't, by the way, you might be in a wheelchair eventually. This is something that people commonly hear from chiropractors. Now, there are a lot of chiropractors in this country, and there may be some in this area, who realized some time ago that what they were doing, what they had gone to chiropractic school for, was not very effective at all. And they have made the big switch. They still have the DC after their names. That's fine, you know, I understand why people need letters after their names. But they are now very rehab exercise focused. They are doing very few adjustments. They are not insisting upon long-term contracts for your life, and they can be very, very effective. When I got past that, I started looking at epidural steroid injections, and all of these things are covered in much more detail in this book. But as it turned out, there was not much use for those either. There was one situation in which they could be very effective. If you had a recent traumatic disc herniation, in other words, you were hit by a car, something drastic happened, it was trauma, and you suddenly had tremendous leg pain all the way down to your foot. Under those circumstances, a properly placed epidural steroid injection could be very effective. But unfortunately, most of the people who have epidural steroid injections have no such problem. They have been suffering from back pain for weeks or months. They have no leg pain, and these are being given by the tens of thousands a month in this country, and they are not without risks. And in the book, I describe a situation, now I've heard, unfortunately, of several more like that, of a woman who thought, well, Christmas is coming and the grandkids are coming, and I'm just gonna get one of those because my back hurts a bit, and I think I could be more, you know, I could get around better. And she did, but unfortunately it went awry, and when I met her, she was in a wheelchair. And she hasn't gotten out of that wheelchair yet, because it is very possible for those injections to go wrong. So what am I saying here? I'm saying chiropractic, not much use. Insurance paid, cookie cutter, physical therapy, where you're doing the same thing as everybody else, not much use. Epidural steroids, very little use. Then we move on, of course, to painkillers. Who has distinguished in their mind between pain relievers and painkillers? You have. So you know that pain relievers are Advil, Aleve, Tylenol, which is unfortunately has not been shown to be useful in treating chronic back pain at all, but Aleve and Advil. The NSAIDs, that's the group they are. Painkillers are opioids, and they range from Vicodin, Tramadol, all the way through oxycodone and all of its friends. And we're very well aware in, I think, every community now of the dangers of those drugs. But as I describe in the book, there was a period of time in the 1980s and 1990s where the pharmaceutical companies that were most involved in selling and promoting these drugs, Purdue Pharma being the main one, but Abbott Labs and quite a few others, Janssen as well, made a very focused pitch to primary care doctors. That hundreds of thousands of primary care doctors in this country received their drug salespeople and were given coupons that they could give out to patients so that they could get started for free and just test drive a prescription for opioids that originally was a 2-week prescription. It doesn't take very long at all to get addicted to opioids. In fact, there are individuals, particularly they seem to be in their early 20s, who become addicted to those drugs in less than a week. And the drug companies insisted that this was impossible, that it required abuse and misuse. And as we've all seen from reading the newspapers and listening to the pathetically sad numbers of deaths, that was not true. It is altogether too easy for people to become addicted to those drugs. Now there is a little bit more focus on helping people withdraw, helping them find treatment. It's still pretty complicated if you have chronic pain. If you've become addicted to them because you took them out of somebody's medicine cabinet but you don't have chronic pain, that's one thing. If you do have chronic pain, now there are a few programs in this country that will help you not only withdraw from the opioids, but also deal with your chronic pain. And I talk about those programs in this book. And if anyone here would like to talk to me privately about this question, I am available to discuss it because it is a really pesky one. People find it almost impossible to get off them by themselves. Some people can do it. Most people can't. You feel terribly, terribly sick when you try. It's like having the flu and a massive anxiety attack simultaneously. And yet the drugs, the opioids it's been made very, very clear in the medical literature in the last year that they are not more effective in treating back pain than the NSAIDs, to which you will not become addicted. You can have some problems from constantly taking large doses of NSAIDs, but death is typically not one of them. So if anybody needs to discuss that, let's set a time and do it, as I can make some recommendations for treatment programs that can help you. So these are some of the things I talk about in the first half of the book. And in the second half, the first half is called Problems, not surprisingly, given what you've just heard, right? That also includes a chapter about surgery and the risks therein and the very, very poor outcomes from spinal fusion surgery that surgeons have known about since they began doing spinal fusion surgery. But now it is becoming much more difficult to get those operations approved. So actually that is a good thing because very frequently people have spinal fusion procedures and instead of being better afterwards, they're worse. And the older you are, the riskier it is. And I know of too many people who have had those procedures because they believed it was their only option. And I've heard that phrase so many times, their only option. And the problem with that is it's never their only option because it's not a good option. It's a very poor option because very frequently they do not recover. And it's basically talking about a very long lifetime of pain and frequently also addiction. So in the second half of the book, we talk about solutions, which I'm sure you're really all here to hear about. And as you may have heard, the only really well identified and accepted treatment for chronic back pain is something that seems so counterintuitive that you cannot believe that it could possibly work, and that is exercise. Now, when we're in pain, we don't want to exercise, right? We just don't want to. It's so anathema. I mean, we want to get into bed with a heating pad, but we do not want to move. And also, we can suffer from something that's called fear-avoidant behavior, because we feel that, well, we did move recently and it hurt, and that is our body saying, don't do that again. Well, in many cases, that is true with other types of pain. I mean, if you put your hand on the stove, which, I mean, obviously we have all reached for a hot pan, you get pain, and that is telling you, don't do it again, right? That's correct, of course, you should not. But back pain is quite a different situation. And exercise is crucial and also the way out. In the book, I identify about 8 different options, all of which have their benefits. It is not really a thing where one type of exercise works, but another type of exercise does not. But I thought it would be helpful in the book to really kind of identify directions in which people can go. And so not only do I discuss, for instance, who here has ever heard of Feldenkrais? Lots of times no one has. Okay, so a few. Feldenkrais is a very gentle, very easy, very safe form of exercise. It's safe really no matter what condition you're in or what age you are. A lot of it is basically lying down on your back on a mat, and yet it is incredibly effective and has done amazing things for a lot of older people. When I say older, I mean 75 on up to over 100, who have come to me and said, you know, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to move again. I really think I'm done. And once they enter a Feldenkrais class, they begin to move their bodies very gently, very small ways, and they find new freedom that allows them the next time to move a little bit more. But Feldenkrais is, if you're interested, Jane Brody of the New York Times, who writes the personal health column, she had never done Feldenkrais, and she read my book, and she went to her first, she's about 87 years old. She went to her first Feldenkrais class and absolutely fell in love with it, and wrote an entire column about Crooked and Feldenkrais, and gave a very good overview of what it's really like for a person with mobility issues, which she certainly has, but less. I talk about Iyengar yoga, which is known as the orthopedic yoga. I think you've done a lot of these things. Either that or you're a yoga teacher, something like that. I can spot them. The Iyengar yoga programs exist all over the country, and they are very, this is also a very good approach if you have long-term chronic back pain. Simple weight training exercise done under the supervision of what I refer to as a back whisperer. Now, why can't you just go to the gym and start heaving some stuff around? All right, well, if you were in shape already and you didn't have back pain, that might be viable, but please note that chiropractors like to set up their offices right next to gyms, because that's how they get their patients. So what you need is somebody who really understands how backs work, what your particular shortcomings are, possibly through no fault of your own, possibly through a fault of your own, and how to work with you to rebuild muscles that have, over the years, become severely deconditioned. Really, that is what I learned after I went through a fairly minor surgery that fortunately did not damage me severely or for life. I was able to get into a serious exercise program. And nothing good happened from that surgery, but a lot of good came from the exercise program. And within a relatively short time, and I mean about 3 months, the pain began to relent, and I became increasingly fit. The trainer I started to work with referred to me as a brain on a stick, when I got there. That wasn't really wrong. I really had spent a lifetime and no body really involved. And I had to build muscles that would support my spine. Because your spine does not stand up by itself. You know, despite what you see in the chiropractor's office, if we were to strip out the muscles and just stand a spine there, it would be in a heap of bones on the floor. There is nothing about it that would allow it to stay erect. So to be stable, those muscles have to come into play. And all of these exercise options address that same question. The brain also has to come into play because much of what we consider chronic pain, oh my God, you know, I've got it right here, it's really bothering me. Well, think about what we know about injury, all right? So you have a really unfortunate experience with an avocado and a knife, right? This happened to me last summer, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. I'm all bandaged. I'm having a dinner party. It's bad. And about 3 days later, it was healed because our bodies are great that way. Our bodies have remarkable healing ability. So I cut myself very badly, and it healed in 3 days. But my explanation for this pain in my hip or my back is that I had an incident 15, 20, 30 years ago, and it never healed? Not really, because at a certain point, and it's quite early on, that pain is being generated by your brain. It's no longer because of an injury, although we have all been asked by our physicians, you know, what was the inciting incident? Oh, well, I bent over and I picked up the newspaper, or I took a bag of groceries out of the car, or I lifted a suitcase, or I made a bed, or I took something out of the dishwasher. Well, we've all been doing this our entire lives, and it's highly unlikely that that was the inciting incident. What you have is a situation with very deconditioned muscles. You hurt yourself, and you start walking really funny, if you're walking at all, or maybe you just take to your chair and you don't move. And when that happens, the rest of your body starts to suffer terribly. And your brain begins to generate the pain, and that has to be changed. And the way, ironically, that is changed is through exercise, because your brain tends to panic, right? Your brain has one job, and that is to protect you from being dead. And if your brain makes a mistake and thinks that when you bend over to pick up that newspaper, because you have these deconditioned muscles, you are at risk. Your spinal cord is at risk. Your brain sends a message, clamp it all down, don't let this person move, because this person's entire spinal cord is at risk. We will spasm everything, and that person will remain safe. The message often does not get through quickly enough that, hey, that was a mistake. The person is not at risk. The person is actually okay. And the only way that we can really revise that message to the brain is by doing things, by moving normally, by exercising, by living a life. And that's one reason that opioids are such a serious problem, is because they remove any impetus for the person to do that, and things just get worse and worse. So I'm going to drink some water. I am going to take a whole bunch of questions, and we'll go from there. Who has a question? Do not be shy. It always is about 40 questions, and it just takes a while. Go ahead.
Any meds that could cause side effects that could cause back problems, like muscle spasming, and are there any certain drugs that could cause? Well,
they say that statins can cause muscle spasms, but typically they cause the muscle spasms in the legs, not in the back. I am not aware of any that actually will cause muscle spasms in the back, but what will cause back pain, and so many people have no idea of this and suffer unnecessarily, is constipation. So, and opioids, of course, are very constipating. So people who take them are frequently constipated, which makes them have back pain, which makes them think they need more opioids, and you get the picture here. But even those people who are not on opioids, if you're not fairly active and you don't have a good diet, then you have, and perhaps this is too graphic, but the colon and the sciatic nerve on the right-hand side of your body, they run right next to each other. So if you're constipated consistently, it will impact the sciatic nerve, and the sciatic nerve will respond by sending signals all over to spasm. So it's not a drug, it's a actual failure to have, you know, a good healthy bowel. A lot of people don't. Go ahead.
So just want to my wife, who's a librarian here, about a year ago, she fell on some ice, she fractured her hand, she went to physical therapy, everything you talked about.
For her hand?
Absolutely replicates her experience. She had carpal tunnel on top of that. She had a surgery, then they recommended she have another surgery. She finally went to this physician in Stanford.
I'm sorry, were these surgeries on her hand or her back? On her hand, okay. Yeah.
And this physician just said, no more surgery, exercise. And
Yeah.
just emphasized the whole exercise piece. And I noticed myself, if I strain my back, I work through it somehow over the next few days.
Right.
Because so I really just want to reinforce that. I really.
Well, it's just unfortunate that maybe it's a societal issue, maybe it's a medical professional issue, but we have come to perceive pain of any kind as something we need to get rid of immediately, and we need to get to the root of immediately. And of course, you know, if you break a leg, yes, but it is almost impossible to diagnose the source of back pain. And I don't say almost impossible because really smart people can do it. Really smart surgeons are the first to tell you they cannot do it. I mean, if you have a congenital deformity, you know, you're born with scoliosis, they can diagnose that just fine. But if you come in and you talk about, you know, you've got what is called, come on in if you want, here's a guy, all right, axial low back pain, which they also refer to as unspecific low back pain, they can't diagnose it because guess what? It's not structural, so it's out of their wheelhouse, in fact.
I just want to, in addition, this is 2 years now, and she's still icing her hand. Is that a good thing, or is that?
Probably entirely useless to be icing her hand. You know, things happen that I don't know your wife, and I'm sure it's been a miserable experience for her. But there's a lot that goes on around these injuries emotionally. And there's a lot of fear tied up in it. And, you know, I'm sure she fell on the ice and it was harsh and it probably stopped her from doing anything she needed to do. Right. I mean, I have a friend who just fell off a bicycle, shattered her elbow, and her husband had to put on her bra for 3 months. It was not pretty, apparently. He had no experience. But it may be that there's a practice called cognitive behavioral psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in fact, that really helps people who are suffering from chronic pain, persistent pain, pain that has no longer got a physical structural manifestation. It's not an open wound or a broken bone. It's not cancer, you know, it's not a blood disease. It's healed, but for her, it's not completely healed. She's still carrying a lot of fear. And so at that point, a CBT practitioner who could help her work through what it is that really scares her, which may be walking out the door when there's ice. I mean, it could be any number of things. It could be I think a good example is I was this year in India for work, and the first day I arrived there in my very lovely hotel room, I walked out of the shower, dried my feet perfectly, spread mats all over, and slipped on a marble floor and slammed down. I will be afraid of marble floors for the rest of my life. You know, it had never happened before. It will most likely never happen again, but for the rest of my life, I will look with great skepticism upon any marble floor. And people are like, what is wrong with you with the marble floors? But, you know, that's ingrained now. I know what can happen. She knows what can happen. So that might be something to look into. Who else has a question?
Are those CBT therapists scarce?
Less scarce than they used to be, that's for sure. Coming along nicely. What would be your local hospital, Stanford, or what would be the local hospital for you? The bigger, you know, Yale, yeah. Well, Yale has CBT therapists, definitely, yes. You know, sometimes if you're dealing in a tiny town somewhere, there might not be any, but Yale definitely has that going, and a nice rehab, you know, physical rehab department as well. Some really great people there. Yes?
You haven't mentioned stenosis.
Well, stenosis is extremely common. And practically anyone who ever brings it up with me tells me that they have been diagnosed with severe spinal stenosis, which seems to be the only kind of diagnosis that a surgeon actually provides. Stenosis, what does it mean? Okay, well, as you know, the vertebrae stack on top of each other, right? That's how it is. In between, there's a disc. As you get older, it's the wrinkles inside again. You know how, unfortunately, skin collapses? We've all had a little experience with perhaps the inner thigh area. Well, the same thing happens with the disc. The disc desiccates, the moisture goes away. The disc is collagen, just like the collagen in your skin, no difference. And the vertebrae feel, the brain perceives this as unstable, that the vertebrae are not very stable. And the way it handles that is to start to build bone inside the vertebrae. So the vertebrae are basically hollow like this. So it starts to build bone, and the way it builds bone are these little needle-sharp teeth, which is not very bright of the brain, but that's what it can do. So it builds these little needle-sharp teeth, which begin to impinge on the spinal roots that go through there. So what you get is pain, you get cramping in your butt and your hips, you get this heavy feeling in your legs, and this is relieved primarily by sitting down or leaning over like this. Well, there are certainly a lot of surgeons out there right now who are perfectly willing to operate on spinal stenosis, and they say, well, we'll go in there and we'll clean it out. Well, that makes a fair amount of sense, but it will not stay cleaned out. They will be back, and they will be sharp, and you will be in the same situation. For a lot of people who have been told they have spinal stenosis, that's their problem. Their actual problem is they really have lost all their muscle tone, and so they don't have what they need to support themselves. And once again, the solution to that problem is more often reconditioning than surgery. Why would it be a problem? You know, like Medicare will pay for it, so why not? Well, in order to get in there to do that clean out, this is the part they often leave out, they must penetrate 9 layers of tissue to get in to where they got to clean it out. So that means they're going through muscle, then they're going through bone, now they're going to do the cleaning out, then they're going to exit. There's a lot of opportunity for damage. Then if you have that surgery, you have to rehab or you will not be better. Well, the chances are pretty good that if you rehabbed without the surgery, you'd have the same outcome. And they have shown multiple studies, which I discuss in the book, have shown 6 months to a year out, the outcomes are the same. So yes, we have the inclination to have surgery because it seems fast and it seems weirdly cheap because, You know, our insurance providers, I mean, that's not so useful anymore because you still get hit up for a giant deductible, but Medicare will certainly pay for it. And so it seems like the prudent choice for a lot of people. I thought it was the prudent choice, in fact. And the situation that is rarely explained is the rehab is not going to be optional. You're going to have to work really, really hard to come back from that operation. And it really makes sense to first proceed by doing the rehab and seeing if that works out. Now, is the rehab, once again, we've talked about this, it's not going to a physical therapist and getting, you know, a set of six figures exercises that you might as well be doing this with your forefinger. It actually is quite hard work. And people always say to me, well, what exercises? Well, on my website, which is cjramin, R-A-M-I-N, just like my name, .com, you will find in the navigation bar, it says McGill, M-C-G-I-L-L, Big 3. And that is described in great detail here, but there's a link to McGill. Stuart McGill, with a white, he's a Canadian with a giant white walrus mustache, and he is a biomechanist, and he is a brilliant man, and he has come up with 3 basic exercises that strengthen the relevant body parts, which seem to help an extraordinary number of people if you can go by the people who write to me and the people who go on Amazon and review the book. Because we now have 117 5-star reviews on Amazon, which is an almost unheard of situation, and about 12 people who weren't crazy for it. So Stuart McGill is mentioned very frequently. I've actually managed to make his book a bestseller while mine is from people who are reading mine, which is, you know, something I don't think he ever anticipated. But this simple set of exercises, which I promised that I would do, except for there are no mats, and I treasure my knees, and so I don't think I will do them. But I do strongly suggest that you go and look at them. Anyone can do them. Should have a spotter so that your body remains fairly straight and flat. You don't want to be tipping this way or tipping that way. I mean, you won't hurt yourself, you just won't get any benefits. So don't rush for spinal stenosis surgery before you do everything else that you should be doing. Who else has a question? Are we clean out of questions? Oh, you have.
What about vitamins and supplements?
Vitamins, well, you know, osteoporosis is certainly a problem for women, and for you, and for a lot of women, and for men too, by the way, but it's just so many more women than men. So there's a big question now about supplemental calcium. After years and years and years of women being told to take supplemental calcium, the new information is it's not useful. Take real calcium, drink milk, have yogurt, eat cheese, eat green vegetables with tremendous calcium, like broccoli is full of calcium. I was so surprised to hear that. So upping that calcium intake is very important, but you can't do it by popping the pills. And, you know, that was so depressing to the manufacturers of vitamin D, I'm sure, when that information came out, and magnesium and calcium, because it's simply not as effective as we were told that it was for many, many years. In terms of of other supplements, in terms of your joints, the omega-3s there's a good deal of support for omega-3s, like fish oil, et cetera. And I take fish oil. I think it does make a difference. I really do. I think it does help. And it's also so there's a commonality: fish oil, both of them. So, diet is pretty important, and what's important about diet is be thin. You know, it's very difficult on your back if you're carrying the equivalent of a load of rocks on your front. And people, you know, people who have back pain are often quite sedentary, and thereby they gain weight. And the more weight they gain, the more pain they're in, et cetera. And just getting into a walking program, I would imagine somewhere in this community there's probably a group walking program through the Y or something like that. And just getting into a walking program where you go out walking with a bunch of friends and you do 2 miles or so, that can get you started. That can get you moving. That can begin to change the picture. In terms of other supplements, turmeric is also supposed to be good for reducing inflammation. It's very popular. I have not had any success with it personally, but and it does make your pee very yellow. Go ahead.
Perhaps someone could benefit from this experience. A doctor recommended Zyflamend to me, and I do think it helps. It's a supplement, and it does have turmeric and ginger and various other things. And
Those are anti-inflammatories.
right.
Yeah.
Zyflamend, and I do take 2 every day.
Mm-hmm. Is it very expensive?
It's expensive, but I wouldn't call it very expensive. It's probably about $35. It's probably about, I want to say maybe it's about 50 cents a day
Mm-hmm.
if you
Well,
take the prescribed amount.
That's not too bad for feeling good. Now, I mean, the anti-inflammatory question, I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of this does generate continual feedback loops with the brain that encourage inflammation. So everything that you can do to reduce inflammation is positive, except prednisone, and don't do that. So, and that is free cortisone, various types of cortisone. Epidural steroid injections are, of course, cortisone injections. But there are physicians out there still who, for back pain, want to give you a Medrol pack, a prednisone pack, and that does not work. There is no evidence at all in multiple studies that that is useful, and prednisone has very bad effects on bone, on brain, on heart, and everything else. So sometimes you have to take it. There are situations that have nothing to do with back pain in which it is essential to take it, but taking it for something that it doesn't work for doesn't strike me as being a really good plan. Does I have any other questions here? Yes.
Do you have anything different to say about foraminal stenosis versus spinal stenosis?
Foraminal stenosis is a type of spinal stenosis. There's central canal stenosis and there's foraminal. The foramina, that's the window that the nerves exit. So if you have a vertebrae and a vertebrae, and there's a little space in between here in which the spinal nerves can get out, the spinal nerve roots can exit. And when there's foraminal stenosis, instead of squeezing the central nerve roots, it's squeezing, instead of squeezing the central spinal nerves, it's squeezing the nerve roots. That causes a little bit of a different pain pattern, but the same thing holds true. It's a similar situation, that building the muscles in your back that help you stand up goes a long way to solving that problem, and it seems that Feldenkrais is really working well for that at this point. Now, people's bodies are all different, but one thing that happens to people who sit a ton is they really lose the use of their glutes. We all know where the glutes are? That's your butt, right? They really lose gluteal development fast, and that can be seen by people who have flat butts. They really don't. Now, having a hugely fat butt is not helpful either, but you want muscle tissue back there, right? Not fat. But if you sit all the time, you lose that. And when you lose that, then the hip flexors start having to do all the work. The hip flexors should be over here, you can't see. The hip flexors are attached to the psoas muscles. The psoas muscles are attached to the spine. So when these get tight, it's going to pull you into this position. And when you're walking around in this position, you have tremendously imbalanced spine, and you will end up with low back pain that way. So, you know, we all sit a lot. I mean, I have to fight it off. I don't know, I can't work standing up. I just don't have the coordination to write and think and stand at the same time. I probably couldn't chew gum either. But it is something that I have to think about. And I'm actually writing a piece right now for Men's Health magazine about sitting options. Like, what are we supposed to do if we can't just collapse in our desk chairs or our easy chairs or our sofas or our dining room chairs or our cars or in the theater or, you know, at the movies or on a train? How can you really contend with this requirement for sitting? And it really does look like most what is called spinal stenosis is actually the loss of the muscle development in the areas that matter. Sometimes I make people stand up and turn around, but I don't think I'm going to do that right now. So anything else I can tell anybody? Now, we do have some books. I brought only 3. So if you are interested, I have a little square. I can sell them to you. There's 3 of each, and otherwise you can email me, very easy to find, through cjraymond@mac.com, and that, I think, will be it. And thank you very much for coming out when you probably have about 1 million things to do.